Today, we will have the main instructional portion of the workshop, and then we will follow up with some time for question and answers. You will be given instructions towards the end of the workshop to complete the webinar survey and the post-workshop exam so that you can get your certificate of attendance. And just a few housekeeping things before we get started. Be sure to have your participant worksheet available so that you can follow along with us. If you didn't have an opportunity to download that before today's webinar, we'll give you a link to that here in just a moment. Feel free to use the chat box to comment or ask questions. And again, we will be asking for you to participate in some polls and comment in that chat box throughout today's webinar. But we also encourage you to ask questions either in the chat or the Q&A for this webinar, and we'll definitely have time to answer any of those questions. Additionally, you can turn on closed captioning for this webinar. There is a button down at the bottom of your video that says CC, and that will allow you to enable that function. So I'm going to go ahead and put that participant worksheet link into the chat. And again, if you weren't able to get that before, we do encourage you to download that because we will be referring to that today, and it's a great place to take notes. Again, be active in the chat today. It just allows you to gain knowledge, share ideas, and reflect on your learning in today's webinar. So to start building a sense of community, we've seen where some of you are from, but let's get to know each other a little bit better here. So for those of you who are not a part of our clinician community here at ILUMA, we're really happy to have you here. ILUMA was founded in 2011 by our current CEO, Jeremy Glauser. At ILUMA, we're on a mission to provide better support for schools so that you can create success stories with students. ILUMA connects students and educators with clinicians who care and provide software solutions to support mental health, speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and school psychology. My name's Cami. I'm an occupational therapist by background. I've been in OT for over 25 years. I'm the clinical services manager here at ILUMA, and I'm really excited to be talking to you today about teletherapy. I've been in teletherapy since 2015, so way before COVID and the pandemic, where all of us kind of started having to work in that space. So I'm excited to talk to you today about teletherapy.
Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Paula Morrison and I'm a school psychologist, and I've been practicing for a little over 25 years, both in the brick and mortar setting and then most recently as a virtual school psychologist as a contractor with ILUMA. My background is in early childhood education, and I've worked with adults with disabilities at the university level. Currently at this time, I am now the mental health specialist in the clinical services department here at ILUMA.
Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Sarah Plunkett and I've been a speech language pathologist for 15 years. Have experience in various settings, pretty much everywhere we can work, but most recently with school-based services and also contracted with ILUMA for a couple years as a clinician doing teletherapy before transitioning to my role as a clinical services specialist.
Okay, so we have some polls here on your screen. Just make a choice. We'd like to see who we've got with us today. All right, speech paths. A couple of school psychologists, got a few there. OT and PT, welcome. Great, welcome, that's great to see. All right, now if you could tell us, what type of school are you with? Public school, charter school, private school, or you're not working with a school right now? Okay, public schools, charter schools, welcome. Those of you who are not currently in schools, welcome. This is great information. All right, thanks everyone.
And we'd also like to know the primary grades that you work with. So if you can answer that poll, we'd love to see that information also. Always interesting to see the divides here. This looks pretty even actually so far.
Mhm.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And this next one's always interesting too. We just want to get kind of a rating for your knowledge of teletherapy. How do you feel? You know, not at all, somewhat, fairly knowledgeable, really knowledgeable. Great. Looks like a pretty good mix here too.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you guys for sharing that. So again, welcome. This is our second webinar in this series, Legal and Ethical Considerations in Teletherapy. This is the second installment of our 4-part teletherapy bootcamp. Just a quick disclosure here, all presenters are affiliated with Illuma Online Therapy Services, a provider of school-based teletherapy services, and presenters do not endorse nor receive any compensation for any products or services included in this presentation today.
You can receive a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, but in order to receive that, you must attend this course in its entirety and complete the post-webinar survey, evaluation, and test. This course is also eligible for 1 NASP Continuing Professional Development credit or a 0.1 ASHA CEU upon passing the post-course evaluation. You must meet the requirements within 24 hours of this course ending.
So as Paula mentioned, Illuma is an ASHA approved CE provider and also NASP CE approved provider. So for our SLPs, if you would like us to report your completion of this course, you'll just be asked to complete the ASHA CE reporting section on the post-workshop evaluation and test. We will remind you about this at the end of the webinar though. If you're eligible to receive your NASP CEUs, you will not need to complete any further information. You will automatically receive your certificate of attendance when you meet the course completion requirements. And for all other disciplines who meet the course completion requirements, you will also receive your certificate of attendance. And just another kind of reminder, disclaimer here, this webinar is for educational purposes only. Nothing in this presentation constitutes any sort of legal advice. Please refer to your LEA for legal policy and procedures.
So here's what we're going to learn today, and you'll find these outcomes in your handout as well. As an engaged participant, this is the knowledge you'll walk away with at the end of this workshop. First, you'll be able to identify 2 key teletherapy resources for ethical practice. You will identify practices to ensure HIPAA, FERPA, and COPPA compliance. And third, you will be able to demonstrate an understanding of appropriate licensure and certification for teletherapy. So let's get started. We have a lot of material to cover, and we want to make sure that we have time to cover all of it and answer any questions you may have. So let's start with information on HIPAA, FERPA, and COPPA.
So that was kind of a acronym salad that Paula just mentioned there. There's a lot of letters being thrown around, and they do have a different meaning. So we want to go over those and make sure that we understand what they each mean and what that means to those of us who are working in school-based teletherapy. So let's start with a brief overview of HIPAA. HIPAA stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which was enacted in 1996. The latest updates were around April 2003. And just a fun fact, this HIPAA was one of my topics in my thesis for my master's degree back in 2001 was when I was writing that. So it was pretty new then, and a lot of things that were coming out to have an impact on the medical environment. And this is a federal law that required a national standard to protect the sensitive health information of a patient and prevent distribution of that information without a patient's consent or knowledge. So this is specific to health and medical information. And the best way to remember what HIPAA requires is through these 3 basic rules. So first, we have the privacy rule, and each of us has a right to privacy when it comes to our medical information. This rule restricts the medical records being released without our consent or a patient's consent, and any information that is identifiable to a specific individual is restricted. We have to authorize, so patients need to authorize in writing for any medical identifiable information to be released to a specific entity. And in some instances, that is just for a specific amount of time, depending on what that entity is. Second, the security rule is the standard for protecting or securing patient electronic and physical information. So any organization that maintains or holds this information must be able to secure that information. And this includes securing confidentiality, protecting against improper use, protecting the patient against any threats to their system, and also training staff and employees about compliance factors and adapting any policies and procedures that might need to be changed to secure these standards. Third, it kind of goes along with that security rule, is that if the security of information is breached, the Department of Health and Human Services must be notified as soon as possible and no later than 60 days of this breach. An immediate announcement of a privacy breach is required also to the Office of Civil Rights, and there may be fines if the entity does not comply with these. In addition, there's another federal act, the Federal Privacy Act of 1974, follows HIPAA guidelines for federal agencies and contractors. So this means that if the entity, like a school or college, receives federal monies, they do have to comply under the Federal Privacy Act. So FERPA, this stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. This was enacted to protect the privacy of student education records. Basically, schools must have written consent to release any information from a student's educational record. Schools may disclose those records without consent to a certain for a certain number of reasons, and that could be to school officials with legitimate educational interest, other schools to which a student is transferring, officials for audit or evaluation purposes, appropriate officials in conjunction with financial aid, an accrediting organization, or to comply with a judicial order or subpoena, and authorities within the juvenile judicial system. FERPA rights transfer to a student when they reach the age of 18 or when they attend school beyond the high school level. On the DOE website, the federal DOE website, schools may disclose without consent a directory of information, which may include students' names, addresses, telephone, date of birth, places of birth, awards, and dates of attendance. However, schools do have to notify parents and students annually under their rights of FERPA and allow a reasonable amount of time to request that the school not disclose any directory information about them. And then finally, COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, states the requirements of websites or online services to children under the age of 13 and the operators or providers of that online service or website. And this was enacted in 1998. This requires that the online service provider or website owner secure any personal identifiable information of children under the age of 13, and that includes things like message boards, emails, or chat rooms. In our first webinar, we referred to this when sending links to students. So you wouldn't want to post any links to your therapy session on any public-facing domains or websites. And I actually was at the KOTA conference, the Kansas OT conference last week, and I was talking about this in one of my classes. And there were some really interesting examples that the audience brought up about this. specifically on a college campus where a website was posted, and they had a lot of people who joined that inappropriately. And so they had to shut down the meeting that was going on because they had posted it on a flyer in the student union. And so just some information, like that you want to be aware of. If you're having any kind of online activity that involves children under 13, then you always want to be cognizant of this, but COPPA does specifically protect any services or things going on where children under the age of 13 would be present. Additionally, assigned parent consent must be received before sharing any information that would be collected on these websites electronically.
And the federal DOE does provide online FERPA 101 training for LEAs on their website. This information is included in your handout, but we wanted to go over just a couple of frequently asked questions from that training here. So the first one, does HIPAA apply to an elementary or secondary school? Generally, no, because the school is not a HIPAA covered entity. It does not transfer health information or engage in billing a health plan electronically. Schools may maintain health information only in student health records. So we think about like our vision and hearing screenings for students, for an example there. Those are the education records under FERPA. And the second here, does FERPA apply to the health records of students maintained by elementary or secondary schools? Student immunization and other health records that are maintained by districts, even those with a school-operated clinic, are education records and subject to FERPA. Therefore, parents have the right under FERPA to inspect and review these health and medical records since they are classified under education records. So now we'll move to some test your knowledge questions. Our first one here is a true/false. HIPAA and FERPA are interchangeable terms. True or false?
Good job.
Yeah, good job. That correct answer is false. And the next one here talks a little bit more about FERPA, like we discussed. So the next question, FERPA rights transfer to the student at age 18, or we're going to ask you to make one of these choices here: attend school beyond the high school level, or when the student moves out. Which one of those would be correct here?
Terrific.
Awesome. Everybody's got that one there. Yeah, when they attend school beyond the high school level.
Each of these national organizations offers guidance on ethical practice in teletherapy services. We'll review each one in the following section. The National Association of School Psychologists provides a guidance document on telehealth virtual service delivery. In the section titled Legal and Ethical Implications, there are specific areas to consider, including informed consent, applicable laws, liability, and due process. In the technology section, it reads this that you'll see on your slides. Student privacy and confidentiality are paramount concerns with telehealth. Currently, providers tend to use video conferencing software for most services. Practitioners must ensure that these technological platforms use appropriate encryption when transmitting data. This can be very hard for the average practitioner to verify on their own. Other security measures should be in place to protect student information and dispose of student data appropriately.
And the American Speech Language Hearing Association statement reads, you can see here, telepractice services must conform to professional standards, including, but not limited to, the Code of Ethics, Scope of Practice, professional policy documents, and other relevant federal, state, and institutional policies and requirements.
And AOTA doesn't have one specific statement, but they have released several positions on teletherapy. And basically, so this is a compilation of some of the different statements that they've released. But what they say is that OT practitioners must consider the unique features of service delivering using telecommunications methods and how they relate to the client or client extenders. And they state that all school-based practitioners must comply with applicable laws, regulation standards, and guidance, which includes the LEA policies, as well as things like FERPA and COPPA. So we have another test your knowledge question here. And for this question, national organizations and state licensing boards for mental health, speech language pathology, occupational and physical therapies offer statements and guidance for ethics in teletherapy. True or false? Okay. And the answer to that is true. They do have some kind of position or statement that they have on each of these.
When the COVID-19 pandemic closed schools and businesses, remote or virtual services began to increase. So there was a huge learning curve for everyone. These are some tips for a secure video conference, and they're from the Office of Ethics at UC Berkeley, and we felt that these could be applicable to your virtual practice. First, as you've heard before, do not post meeting IDs or links in public forums, and also monitor attendees as under the guidance under COPPA, as we mentioned earlier. Be mindful of others in your background, as well as an appropriate background will assist in maintaining FERPA compliance. This also includes if you have several tabs open and you're sharing your computer screen. FERPA compliance will allow you to focus on the session and not worry about the security areas as well. And make sure you keep your Zoom up to date because they have often almost daily updates to their security. So this will make sure that those security measures are in place as well. And as we said, by being consistent with your Zoom updates, your connection will be secure. When sharing your screen, be mindful of things that are on your computer. And if you see any signs of what we call Zoom bombing, those unexpected guests, you can select the security option in the menu and choose suspend participant activities to remove any unwanted visitors. So let's go ahead and test your knowledge. Tips for ensuring a secure video conference include, check those that apply. Great. Okay. Terrific. Yes. All of those things are important for a secure video conference, which include the appropriate virtual backgrounds, the private conferencing links, monitoring for unwanted guests, and protecting the data. Great job, everyone. And now we'll go to the next one. Zoom offers security assistance and allows hosts to remove unwanted guests. Is that true or false? Terrific. Good job, everyone. Terrific. And the answer is true. And Gaynor, I see that you've not been able to answer your recent questions. We'll see what we can do to help you offline.
All right, now we're going to take a deeper look into some privacy issues with a case study here. So Jake is a 7-year-old student with speech and language deficits. His teacher voiced concerns over his ability to answer comprehension questions in the classroom and also his ability to follow multi-step directions. She also stated she had difficulty understanding his speech. Jake is in foster care and is in the process of being adopted by his foster parents. Jake's biological mother is not allowed to contact him. However, she frequently calls the school in an attempt to gain information. A request for screening was sent home with Jake and signed by his foster parents. They also agreed to formal testing and the development of his programming and initial IEP for him to receive services within his school-based environment. Jake's biological mother continues to call the school requesting information on report cards and other school services. So we're going to take a few moments here to reflect on this study. Just think about the privacy issues that might stand out to you. What do you think the school staff should do to protect the students' privacy? We would love to hear your thoughts in the chat. So we'll give you just a few moments to kind of reflect on this information and share your thoughts in the chat. Some good information coming in here. Yeah, the school, is working under those legal issues there. So absolutely, foster parents are in the process of adoption. FERPA must be followed, absolutely. Only communicating with the foster parents are the ones that have, should have access to that information. Court-appointed advocate, that's a really good point to think about other people that we're going to be working with potentially in situations like this. Legal guidelines, of course, need to be considered. Amy, thanks for sharing. We had a case like this and the biological mom still had to sign everything and retained all rights. So, it really can depend on the district you're in, the state you're in, and that specific situation as to what access and what rights, what has been decided, what process or what part of the process they're in as far as legal and court issues and things like that. These are some great thoughts. So now we're going to move on to some considerations for licensure and also credentialing. And we're going to look and review guidance within the following disciplines. We'll talk about mental health, speech and language, and also occupational therapy. So we're going to start off with school psychology. The National Association of School Psychologists provides the following statement. Despite the lack of uniform reciprocity, school psychologists must be credentialed or licensed in the state where they reside and also where they are providing services. For example, let's say that John Smith is a school psychologist in Georgia and is credentialed to provide those services in Georgia. He's also credentialed or licensed in California, providing school psychology services online. Each state has specific requirements to practice school psychology in the schools, so you'll want to refer to the credentialing office for each state. Efforts are underway to create a school psych pact, similar to the Psych Pact for clinical psychologists. The National Association of School Psychologists, NASP, that we've been referring to, provides a national certification that may facilitate the process for cross-state licensing.
For school counselors, it's typically credentialed through the state's Department of Education and is similar to school psychologists. They need to be credentialed in the state that they reside in, as well as in the state in which services are being provided. Some school counselors are also licensed professional counselors or LPCs and may have additional licensing through the state's mental health or behavioral science board. They also have to be licensed in the state they reside, as well as in the state they are providing services. The American School Counselor Association can provide additional guidance. All states require LPCs to pass a comprehensive examination on counseling practice. However, unlike school counselors, LPC endorsements are through a state governing board, and state information is available on the National Board of Certified Counselors directory. Social work is a little more specific, and there are various types of social workers. So for purposes of this webinar, we're going to focus on LCSWs and LMSWs. States vary on the requirements for school social work, and even some districts will vary on the placement of LCSWs over LMSWs. And as in any other discipline, social workers must be licensed in their home state and the state they provide services. The School Social Work Association of America defines school social workers as social workers specifically trained in schools. Additional resources regarding the role of the school social workers can be found on their website. The National Association of Social Workers provides a national credentialing system that certifies social workers meet high standards set by the NASW. And they can also provide a state-by-state comparison of licensing requirements. We've provided that link in your handout. Each state has its own set of requirements for state licensing, and you can find these through the state's licensing board. The Multidiscipline Licensure Resource Project is a great tool to find licensing boards for each state. At socialworkguide.org, they can provide information on licensing requirements by state, along with the links to the state boards. For military members and their spouses, the Veterans Auto and Education Improvement Act of 2022 was signed into law. And what this means is that licensed social workers can now receive reciprocal licensing in states outside their home state, which is very helpful for cross-state licensing.
And as far as ASHA, the Audiology and Speech Language Pathology Interstate Compact is an occupational licensure compact that allows professionals to practice in multiple states without obtaining those additional state licenses. Before the compact can issue privileges to practice, this commission, which is responsible for ASLPIC oversight, must create required rules and bylaws and implement a data system between those states. This work is currently ongoing. The compact is expected to be fully implemented in 2023. I realize we're in 2023, so it is ongoing. It's exciting to see the progress. Currently, it's enacted in 29 states. That's even an update, just recently. It's kind of exciting to follow the progress and see the states that are added. Benefits to the public include, continuity of care, portability for military spouses. I know Paula mentioned that, talking about, with social work, access and choice of providers. It'll facilitate teletherapy, can simplify and improve processes, and address barriers to access. Impacts for providers include, this will certify that audiologists and speech language pathologists have met acceptable standards of practice, promote cooperation between compact states in areas of licensure and regulation, and also offer a higher degree of consumer protection across state lines. Licensed audiologists and SLPs will be able to practice in person or through telepractice across state lines via the privilege to practice. This will also increase access to care and facilitate continuity of care, as we mentioned earlier. We'll be able to provide services to populations that are currently underserved, maybe rural or geographically isolated areas, as well as allow military spouses and personnel to maintain their profession when relocating, which is really important. So here you can see the current status of the compact across the U.S. Like I said, it's ongoing. So if you go, to ASHA's website, it's kind of exciting to see those colors change. And so this will continue to change and grow with these updates.
And occupational therapy is also currently working to create an OT licensure compact. Currently, though, most states require that the practitioner is licensed in the state where the OT practices and in the state where the student resides or is living. AOTA does have a great chart of each of the states and their current regulations for interstate practice. You can find that link in the resources section of your participation worksheet. Those are changing all the time. So we always recommend, especially now as we're coming out of the pandemic, a lot of regulations for practicing across state lines were relaxed a little bit, but we're finding that some of those are now coming back to their original state. As far as the OT compact, it will be an interstate compact, and it's expected to begin accepting applications for privileges in 2024. There are currently 28 states that have joined the compact, and they would be ready to be a part of that, to extend privileges when that is fully enacted. I just read this week that they are getting the boards set up with the compact, so people who will be reviewing and handing out those privileges. So hopefully it'll be sooner than later in 2024. And then the physical therapy licensure compact is currently active, and there are many states actively issuing and accepting compact privileges. I've mentioned, those privileges a few times, and it's not like you can just have a state license and then be like, oh, this other state that I want to start practicing in is in that compact, I don't have to do anything. That's not necessarily the case. You do typically have to send an application in and be granted that privilege. Some states actually do require some kind of a jurisprudence exam or some other, ethical or any specific testing that would have to be passed, along with paying a fee for that privilege. So we have our next test your knowledge question, and I'm going to put this up for us so that we can answer. And this one specifically, the audiology and speech language pathology interstate compact is a licensure compact that allows for clinicians to practice in one state or multiple states. All right.
And while you're working on that, sorry, Cami, there's a couple questions about the ASLP IC Pact, and someone, I thank you, Emily, for sharing that link on the chat. And Sarah just also posted a link for more information on those. For those who just, I think it was a couple people earlier on asked questions about the compact.
Yeah, and there is a question as well. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to respond to this, but just to clarify, the interstate compact is just an application and some other standards rather than having to get an actual license.
Sure. So this will still be licenses. It's just allowing kind of reciprocal, if that's the right word, especially like we mentioned for the military spouses, people that move around a lot and things like that. It's a really nice thing to be able to practice in multiple states. I hope that answered that question.
Typically, you do have to have the privilege. You have to have submitted some type of application or notice to the compact that you're going to be practicing in the other states. There should be a link to the AOTA. That map that I showed was from AOTA or from the OT Compact website specifically. It should be in the resources, but if it isn't, if you just Google search occupational therapy compact, there's a specific website for that and the information and things that are coming up.
And Emily, I've just now seen your question too in the chat. Are states that are labeled not enacted states that declined or will not participate? And that's a great question to address too. I attended a webinar through ASHA on this, and their statement was, if states have not enacted it yet, their legislation is ongoing and they're really kind of constantly working on these states, which is exciting. So the not enacted, I think it's probably safe to say they are still kind of working to, answer questions or work with legislators and different things like that. So it's kind of that continual process of they're going back to the drawing board. I know they mentioned something with kind of continually having conversations, with them, either answering questions or, clarifying information there. So hopefully that is just something that, continues to grow.
Looks like Emily has Sorry,
sorry.
Emily has a question. While we do the next test your knowledge, Emily raised her hand. If you want to type that in the chat while everybody does the next test your knowledge.
Great. And the answer to that one is false. Currently, there are no compacts in any discipline that are enacted in all 50 states. So we do have a little case study here, a scenario that we'd like for you to participate in the chat. So this happened quite a bit during COVID, especially, and it still happens today. You know, we get questions like this frequently. If our student David lives in Idaho, and receives OT through his brick and mortar school. During the pandemic, David and his family went to live just 10 miles away over in Washington State, but the brick and mortar school wanted his occupational therapist, who also lived in Ohio, to continue weekly services on Zoom. So, you know, what we would need to do in this situation is check that both of those states. Many school practitioners during this time, you know, we were asked, I had several cases specifically in the district that I was physically working in, where we had, because we're close to the Missouri border. So we had a lot of families who were kind of moving around, and it is different for education, for academics. So teacher credential is very different than having a license like a lot of medical providers like OTPT, speech, things like that. So we would want to check each state. And if we look at that chart that AOTA has for states' telehealth information, we would find that Idaho does not have a position on whether out-of-state OTs can see a student who is living or visiting in a different state. However, Washington State's administrative codes state that an occupational therapist or occupational therapy assistant using telehealth to provide therapy to patients in Washington must be licensed to provide occupational therapy in Washington. So therefore, this OT practitioner would not be able to continue to see this student unless they got licensed in Washington as well. So it's always a good idea to, like we said, check directly with your state licensure board, as well as the AOTA chart, because new regulations are coming out all the time or being changed from being lax during the pandemic.
And in this case study, we're going to review licensing concerns regarding cross-state licenses. So here we have Susan, who lives in West Virginia and receives counseling services via Zoom from a social worker who lives in Georgia. Her social worker has been licensed in West Virginia as well as Georgia, so there's no concern there about her ability to meet the licensing requirements. However, Susan's going on a vacation out of state, but she doesn't want to miss her session. The ability to temporarily provide services is a common concern when practicing across state borders. And the answer is not clear and largely depends on the individual state requirements, and these requirements are updated regularly. So in this scenario, Susan's going to Florida and her social worker is not cross-licensed in Florida. And while some mental health professions like LPCs have a psych pack and counselors have the counseling compact coming up in 2024, they can expedite licensing and provide services, but I'm not sure how fast that expediting is going to be in time for her vacation. And then there's the mental health providers who have the military spouse has that cross license expedition as well. However, some states might provide a temporary license, like Florida, which at this time it says, quote, no person shall be required to be licensed, provisionally licensed, registered, or certified who is not a resident of this state, but offers services in this state for no more than 15 days in any calendar year, and the non-resident is licensed or certified to practice the services provided by another state. So in this case, Susan's social worker could provide services to Susan while she was away in Florida for a week. This would also apply if Susan was receiving services from an LPC or licensed counselor. These do not apply to school psychologists as they're credentialed through the state DOE, and at this time, they do not have a cross-state pact like LPs and LPCs. A state-by-state survey of telemental health laws was conducted by a law firm named Epstein, Becker, and Green, and they have created this app called Telemental Health Laws. It's free, and it does provide you with the state-to-state comparison on current legislation and telemental health laws. Okay, so let's move on. Let's test your knowledge. Licensing boards for mental health, speech language pathology, occupational therapy, and physical therapy offer guidance on compacts which facilitate interstate practice. All right, well, that was quick. Okay, everybody's on it. Great. And the answer is true. Great work, everyone.
So now we'll look at some additional resources here for ethical practice. These national organizations do offer additional guidance regarding ethical practices in telehealth. Membership in these organizations might be required though, so just be aware there. To secure the privacy of your phone number, some platforms like Zoom offer a Zoom phone number. Google Voice is a Google app that can protect your personal phone number if you need to use that. Lastly, be sure to understand your district's confidentiality policies regarding, signed releases and consent forms. Some districts will accept the electronic signatures. Some require electronic and hard copies. So just be aware of those there. So now we're going to test our knowledge again here. We mentioned Google Voice briefly a minute ago. Google Voice offers protection for your phone number or your address. Almost everybody's chiming in here. Yeah, absolutely. That correct answer is your phone number. Google Voice does offer protection for your phone number. And the next one here, which of the following are considerations regarding ethics and confidentiality? Consent, privacy, confidentiality, all of the above. Got a strong start here. Absolutely, all of the above there. So now we're going to take another kind of pause and reflect moment here. We'd love to, again, hear your thoughts in the chat. What areas in your practice will you improve on with increased knowledge of consent, privacy, confidentiality? It's always really interesting to hear these responses kind of across disciplines too. I think it's really important we can learn from each other with different perspectives in general, but also how it might look different depending on your discipline. So yeah, we would absolutely love to hear, your thoughts on some of these things in the chat. For me, this is always one of those things that comes up. We are a lot of times really focused, rightly so, with therapy and kind of the day-to-day. And so this is always an interesting thing to reflect back on, to think about some of these, some of these things are gray areas, kind of tricky, as we mentioned. So Jess, that's a great point. Be more aware on how I share Zoom links, as we mentioned. That's a really great point. Thinking about video platforms and different things like that. Absolutely.
One of the things I always tried to do, because we did our documentation when I was in a brick and mortar school on Google Sheets. And so you could see names in the tabs, as we were documenting, which was secure on our end. However, if I was sharing my screen with the student, I would always try to pull that specific game or activity out into its own window so that there were no tabs open that were being shared, and then share only the window, not the whole desktop when you're sharing your Zoom screen or Google screen or whatever you're using.
Absolutely. You know, a lot of this, I love these, you know, double checking, you know, who you can share information with, and thinking about, you know, security, confidentiality. Emily, I see your question. I use a single Zoom link, but have been told I shouldn't do that. I think this is, you know, depending on like your contract, you know, where you're working and things like that. I mean, I think the option within Zoom, you can generate, I think it's called a unique link. You know, if that's something, you know, you choose or want to do there. But I think some of that, you know, might depend on, you know, where you're working and things of that nature. But I know you do have the capability. You can select a unique link, you know, each time if you need to.
And also, if you're using Zoom, then you would want to enable your waiting room so that students weren't just automatically brought into your classroom. So enable that in Zoom.
Right.
I know Google Meets doesn't have a waiting room feature. So if your school is using Google Meets, or if you're using Google Meets, then you would want to then have some individual links that you would share.
I love all these comments about the compact too. I know a lot of us are, myself included, very excited about the progress with that for sure. Absolutely. Nancy, this is a great question about, you know, international. That poses kind of its own unique set of, you know, a lot of times it depends on, you know, where you are. Certain areas will require, you know, certification. You know, depending on, I don't know, you know, some of the terminology is different. It's if it's actually, you know, a license there, certification, and depending on kind of where you are, I think that varies a lot. I know Cammie and Pola, you guys might have other things to add there, but
yeah, I think
international is definitely an interesting area
for
sure.
I think the key is to just, as a practitioner, we're responsible for our practice and our license. So I know for myself, I always try to look at, so that you always want to pay attention to where you're at and where your student is at, and then research those specific either country or state requirements for yourself, because that's definitely, you know, our responsibility as the license holder. We are the ones who, no matter what any school would try to tell you about what is okay, that they think is okay, we need to verify that for our own personal licenses. Likely you would. I'm not as familiar with international work, but likely you would need to.
Yes. So I was going to say it does vary by country, because whatever country you're in will have a specific employment visa, and you have to have your country's license tied to your visa in order to be working in that country. So it will vary. Some countries are easier than others, but I know that there has been an increase in international work, and so a great forum to explore that would be any of the social media groups of your profession, whether it's SLP, school site. They have forums where they share their own experiences, so that'd be very helpful.
Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap up today. We've gone over a lot of different areas in legal and ethical questions. You can look at these learning outcomes that we talked about at the beginning of the workshop. And again, these are also in your handout as well. On the next screen, we're going to talk about the workshop post survey, evaluation, and test. And some of the questions on there will ask you how well this workshop has prepared you to achieve each of these outcomes. The next link that is going to be entered in the chat box is really important. This is the link to that form. We'll put the link here, and then you'll just click on that right from the chat, and that will help send you over to the workshop evaluation and post-test. You will complete the webinar evaluation and survey first, and then you will be prompted to go to the next section for the post-test. again, is that reminder for SLPs. If you would like us to report your completion of this course, you will be asked to complete an ASHA CE reporting section. So you'll want to choose yes on that section. If you do not want us to report, then you would choose no. Other disciplines other than ASHA, you will just say does not apply to me, and then you'll be moved on to the next part of which is the test. So again, if you meet the completion requirements, then you will receive a certificate of attendance by email within about 48 hours. And again, if you have any questions after this webinar, please email us at clinicalservices@elumatherapy.com, and we would be happy to answer those questions. We do have a few minutes to stick around if you have questions, so we'd love to answer those as well. Hillary, our first webinar was not ASHA CE registered. This is the first webinar that we are able to offer completion requirements that can be submitted for ASHA CE. On that one, you should have received your certificate of completion that you would be able to, use at your own discretion to report. And just as an FYI, we do have 2 more webinars in this series. So our third webinar, Remote Therapy Strategies, will be on October 25th. And then the fourth webinar will be Real World Applications of Teletherapy. And that one will be on November 8th. All right, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. We thank you so much for attending today. We've provided you with the knowledge that you need to understand the legal and ethical implications of teletherapy, the licensure and certification required for teletherapy, and resources to comply with HIPAA, FERPA, and COPPA regulations. Again, remember to receive your certificate for this workshop. You do need to complete the survey and answer the 10 questions on that post-test. So have a great school year.
Thanks for joining us today, you guys.